There is a hidden war happening inside every relationship, silent yet devastating. And most men never realize they are the battlefield. You believe you are free, making choices guided by reason and desire. But every decision bends unconsciously to forces you cannot name. Women have learned, not by intent but by instinct, how to transform emotions into weapons, reshaping the very structure of your thoughts. Kierkegaard once warned that despair is not the absence of freedom, but the surrender of it. And nowhere is this surrender more subtle than in love itself. You imagine that love is mutual, that her emotions mirror your own. Yet beneath the surface, a different logic operates. Her biology has refined psychological tactics over thousands of years, strategies so deeply rooted she herself cannot see them. She tests, withdraws, seduces, and destabilizes, not as conscious manipulation but as instinctive calibration. Kierkegaard describes seduction as a game of masks. And nowhere are these masks more intricate than when emotions become tools of control. She learns to amplify your desires while concealing her own, shaping your responses through tension, scarcity, and uncertainty. One moment, you feel chosen, desired, singular. The next, you are exiled to silence without explanation. You begin to question yourself, not her, doubting your worth, replaying conversations, rewriting memories, searching for what you failed to do. This is where the chains tighten, when your need for validation overtakes your capacity for judgment. The greatest paradox is that she rarely knows she is doing this. These patterns are not premeditated cruelty, but evolutionary algorithms operating beneath conscious awareness. The power lies not in her intent, but in your ignorance of the forces shaping you. Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, to be trapped inside illusions while believing you are free. You thought love meant openness, that honesty was the foundation of intimacy. But reality obeys different laws. Emotional influence is rarely declared. It is exerted invisibly through absence, suggestion, and fragmented signals. You are drawn into a dance whose choreography was written long before either of you existed. The tragedy begins when you mistake her instincts for your destiny. You may believe you're choosing her, but often it is her mastery of emotional leverage choosing you. Scarcity drives attachment. Unpredictability fuels longing. Tenderness alternates with withdrawal until dependency forms. Your brain wires itself around her attention, mistaking intermittent reinforcement for love itself. This is not coincidence but mechanism. Kierkegaard warned that the deepest form of despair is not being aware of having a self. In relationships, this manifests when you no longer know where your boundaries end, and her influence begins. You adapt to her moods, edit your personality to feed her expectations, and silence your instincts to preserve her affection. Every compromise feels small, harmless, even loving, but the cumulative weight bends you into someone unrecognizable. When love transforms into captivity, the signs rarely appear obvious. She may smile as she restrains you, laugh as she redirects you, whisper promises while reshaping your reality. The illusion is most powerful when it feels voluntary, when you believe you are choosing the cage. Few men ever question it because questioning feels like betrayal, and obedience masquerades as devotion. The modern world amplifies this dynamic through constant digital reinforcement. Social media, messages, and curated comparisons intensify scarcity and status anxiety. What once played out in small, private dramas now unfolds publicly, magnifying emotional control across new dimensions. You become addicted not only to her approval, but to the image of her approval reflected to everyone else. The tragedy Kierkegaard foresaw becomes clear. Men rarely lose freedom through force, but through consent. You participate in your own enslavement, offering power in exchange for closeness, surrendering judgment for harmony, and trading sovereignty for desire. You believe you are winning her love, when in truth, you are losing yourself. This is not an argument against women, nor a denial of love, but an invitation to wake from illusions. Understanding emotional leverage does not kill intimacy. it protects it. Without awareness, your boundaries dissolve into hers, and the relationship becomes an arena where instinct, not intention, decides the rules. The test begins when you stop chasing clarity from her and start creating clarity within yourself. The more desperate you are for reassurance, the easier it becomes to control you. She does not need to command when suggestion achieves the same result. Each silence, each sigh, each subtle withdrawal writes new instructions into your nervous system. You begin to notice the pattern only when you step back from the game. The same words that once disarmed you now reveal intention beneath appearance. Where you once saw spontaneity, you begin to see design. Where you thought love was unconditional, you recognize negotiation disguised as devotion. This is where power shifts, from blindness to awareness, from reaction to sovereignty. Kierkegaard argued that freedom is not found in the absence of influence, but in resisting the forces that deny your authentic self. The man who fails here lives as a mirror, reflecting back the desires projected onto him, never discovering his own. He is chosen, discarded, and reshaped endlessly, always seeking validation in a system designed to withhold it. This cycle persists because it hides beneath ideals that sound noble: sacrifice, patience, devotion. But when these virtues are extracted without reciprocity, they are no longer virtues. They are tools of subjugation. You begin to confuse servitude with love, compliance with intimacy, and silence with strength. These are not signs of connection. They are symptoms of erasure. Real power begins where need ends. Until you learn to stand apart from her emotional gravity, every word and glance becomes an axis around which you revolve. The less you control your inner state, the more your identity fragments, surrendering piece by piece to external approval. Desire without boundaries creates devotion without dignity. When you awaken to this, the manipulation loses its grip. Not because she changes, but because you do. She can withdraw, mirror, suggest, or test. But your response remains rooted, unshaken by the storm of shifting signals. Emotional sovereignty is not resistance to her influence, but transcendence beyond it. You become immune without becoming indifferent. Men fear losing women, yet Kierkegaard reminds us the greater tragedy is losing the self. Every compromise that erases your boundaries is a silent funeral for the man you were meant to become. Love without freedom is not love. It is strategy masquerading as intimacy. To mistake control for connection is to live enslaved while believing you are adored. If you found this reflection unsettling yet familiar, it is because part of you recognizes its truth. These patterns do not exist in every woman, but in the architecture of human desire itself. If you want to master this dynamic rather than be mastered by it, awareness is the first step. Stay here, explore deeper, and subscribe for more. You believed love would liberate you, yet somewhere along the way it became a chain disguised as a promise. The more you invest, the more invisible demands grow, until you wake up realizing your autonomy has been slowly negotiated away. Kierkegaard warned that the deepest despair comes not from losing what you love, but from losing yourself in pursuit of being loved. This is the silent tragedy unfolding in countless relationships without a word being spoken. She doesn't need to shout or demand to achieve control. Emotional influence operates quietly, reshaping behavior beneath conscious awareness. A single sigh, a subtle withdrawal, an unexpected silence. All of it triggers anxiety, forcing you to adjust without even realizing you're doing so. What looks like choice on the surface is often nothing more than conditioned response. When love becomes intertwined with uncertainty, your nervous system is rewired to crave her approval like oxygen. Every message, glance, or gesture becomes a test, and every inconsistency deepens your dependence. Kierkegaard described this as the vertigo of freedom. You mistake chaos for passion because your need for emotional grounding has been outsourced entirely to her. The cruel irony is that many women aren't consciously orchestrating these patterns. Instinct, not strategy, drives the dynamic. Her biology has perfected emotional testing as a survival mechanism over generations. The moment you confuse this testing with unconditional devotion, you step willingly into a framework designed to measure your psychological resilience without your knowledge. But understanding this doesn't free you unless you accept responsibility for your reactions. Men often believe that awareness alone is enough, yet continue behaving as if her approval defines their worth. Kierkegaard argued that despair thrives where freedom is unclaimed, and here lies the trap. You know you're being shaped, but still refuse to reclaim yourself. Her emotional oscillation between closeness and distance can feel intoxicating, even addictive. The periods of intense affection followed by sudden withdrawal create neurological bonds as powerful as chemical dependency. Your mind begins craving the high of her warmth while fearing the abyss of her silence, creating a cycle from which few escape. Modern life magnifies this manipulation through endless points of comparison. Every curated photo, every strategically delayed response, every subtle hint of other men competing for her attention strengthens her psychological leverage. When your value becomes tethered to external validation, she no longer needs to command. It is you who enslave yourself through obsession. You may begin altering your identity to match her expectations, abandoning your own priorities, dreams, and friendships in the process. At first, these sacrifices feel like proof of love. But over time, you realize you've surrendered everything that made you distinct. This is Kierkegaard's despair, disguised as devotion, the slow death of individuality under the weight of emotional dependency. And yet, the tragedy is deeper still. Even she may respect you less as you submit. The very traits that drew her in, your independence, strength, and groundedness, erode beneath constant concession. The paradox emerges clearly. The more you comply to preserve her love, the less of you remains for her to desire. This is where Kierkegaard's philosophy becomes a weapon of liberation. He warned that true authenticity requires confronting anxiety rather than escaping it, standing within uncertainty without surrendering to the illusions it creates. In relationships, this means refusing to confuse her emotional storms with the truth of your value. The failure of most men is not weakness but misalignment. They assume her reactions represent objective reality, when in truth, they reflect shifting internal states rooted in ancient survival codes. Without boundaries, you become a puppet, moving according to strings she herself cannot always see. Boundaries are not resistance but clarity. When you stop chasing explanations for every mood, when you no longer collapse at every sigh or silence, you reclaim the part of yourself that existed before her. Power returns the moment you stop negotiating your worth through her emotional approval. But this transformation requires more than detachment. It demands purpose. A man without a mission beyond his relationship is most vulnerable to emotional control. When love becomes the center of existence, any threat to it destabilizes the entire self. Kierkegaard warned that dependence on another's gaze leads inevitably to despair because your identity ceases to belong to you. To regain sovereignty, you must cultivate meaning that cannot be withdrawn by her silence or affection. Your life must orbit a center she cannot touch, built from values, discipline, and a vision larger than her perception of you. Only then does her emotional influence lose its power. Not because she changes, but because your gravity outweighs hers. And yet, this does not mean rejecting love. Paradoxically, relationships deepen when manipulation loses its effect. When you no longer bend beneath subtle pressures, she must relate to your strength rather than your weakness. The dynamics transform from silent testing to conscious communication, from emotional power plays to authentic connection. Women who cannot thrive without control will escalate when these tactics fail. They will intensify tests, provoke emotional extremes, and attempt to destabilize you through heightened unpredictability. This is not malicious, but instinctive. Her biology is recalibrating, trying to reassert influence over an unfamiliar variable, your sovereignty. Others, however, will adapt differently. When she realizes manipulation cannot move you, Respect replaces strategy. She engages from curiosity rather than control, openness rather than defense. These are the rare relationships capable of producing intimacy without erasure, where two complete selves converge rather than consume one another. The difference between these paths lies entirely in you. She may initiate the test, but you decide its outcome. If you remain reactive, the cycle continues endlessly, eroding both attraction and autonomy. If you remain grounded, the testing stops. Not because she chooses to stop, but because biology abandons ineffective strategies over time. Kierkegaard believed the ultimate form of despair was forgetting to choose oneself. In relationships, this means losing the ability to act outside the gravitational pull of her approval. The man who reclaims this choice steps beyond the illusions of emotional enslavement into a state of radical freedom, where love becomes voluntary, not obligatory. The deepest trap is believing you can negotiate freedom with independence. Every time you justify her control as love, you reinforce the very structure keeping you bound. Kierkegaard warned that illusions are most dangerous when they feel like truth. And nowhere is this clearer than when emotions are weaponized beneath the name of intimacy. You imagine she wants harmony, but instability is often the true tool of influence. By keeping you uncertain, she secures your constant pursuit, ensuring you work endlessly to regain balance that was never truly lost. The scarcity she creates magnifies her value while diminishing your own, without a single explicit demand. Over time, this dynamic transforms you into someone unrecognizable, and yet you will defend it as if your survival depends on it. This is the tragedy of unconscious captivity. You serve the system that drains you while believing it nourishes you. You confuse fear with passion, volatility with depth, and dependence with devotion. This isn't about villainizing her, but understanding the machinery beneath the surface. Her emotional strategies are not inventions. They are inheritances, shaped by evolutionary necessity and perfected across generations. But survival codes from another age now collide with modern identity, creating chaos for men unprepared to withstand them. Masculine illusion sustains the entire cycle. You convince yourself you are choosing her freely, when in reality, your choices emerge from triggers she learned to pull without knowing why. You redefine compromise as love, control as connection, and surrender as strength. But this language exists to soothe captivity, not describe freedom. Kierkegaard described despair as fleeing from the self. And this is exactly what happens here. Each time you mold your identity to her moods, each time you abandon your path for her approval, you erase fragments of yourself. Eventually, there is nothing left but the reflection of her expectations staring back at you. And yet, awareness is the fracture where control begins to fail. The moment you name the pattern, the spell weakens. The silences become transparent, the withdrawals predictable, the suggestions obvious. Once seen clearly, the mechanisms lose their power because you no longer confuse them with the essence of love. But awareness alone is not enough. Sovereignty requires discipline. You must train the capacity to withstand emotional pressure without collapsing into compliance. This is not coldness, but strength. The refusal to be defined by external storms. Emotional sovereignty means owning your responses so completely that no manipulation, conscious or unconscious, penetrates your center. This shift terrifies women reliant on influence, forcing them into an unexpected confrontation with their own strategies. Some escalate, intensifying tactics until exhaustion forces collapse. Others adapt, abandoning manipulation entirely to engage from authenticity. Both outcomes reveal the truth of her character far more than words ever could. For men, this is the true test: to stop measuring strength by how well you please her, and start measuring it by how deeply you remain grounded within yourself. Love offered from weakness seeks approval. Love offered from strength invites connection. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith, but it requires leaping into your own becoming first. The tragedy is that most men never reach this point. They spend years trapped in invisible negotiations, losing identity piece by piece, until bitterness replaces passion. They blame women, society, or fate, never realizing the surrender began within. Freedom cannot be taken from a man who refuses to give it away. Masculine illusion collapses entirely when you recognize that emotional captivity is sustained by your participation. Every overreaction, every concession without clarity, every pursuit born from fear reinforces the cage. The key has been in your hand all along, not because you control her, but because you reclaim yourself. True strength is not resistance to love, but resistance to erasure. When you no longer depend on her validation, affection becomes a choice, not a transaction. Connection deepens when both people stand as individuals rather than extensions of each other's survival codes. Love cannot flourish where freedom is absent. And here lies the paradox Kierkegaard foresaw. Only the man who no longer fears losing her becomes capable of loving her fully. Without desperation, affection is voluntary. Without dependence, desire is authentic. The illusion dies, and with it, the constant testing, bargaining, and subtle warfare beneath the surface. For women, this shifts everything. Emotional weapons lose function when they no longer provoke chaos. The woman who desires control departs. The woman who seeks connection remains. You no longer live at the mercy of patterns designed by biology. You now choose consciously who you engage and on what terms. Yet sovereignty carries a cost. You must endure solitude without despair, rejection without collapse, and silence without panic. Most men fail here, mistaking absence for abandonment and withdrawal for judgment. But for the few who succeed, relationships cease to be survival games and become platforms for growth. Freedom demands facing the parts of yourself addicted to emotional drama, validation, and rescue. Until you confront these cravings, no woman enslaves you. You enslave yourself. Kierkegaard reminds us that despair is self-chosen when we seek salvation outside our own becoming. There is no love without first reclaiming the self. When you achieve this, manipulation becomes irrelevant, not because it disappears, but because it no longer reaches you. Her moods may shift, her silences may deepen, her signals may confuse, but your identity remains intact, unshaken, sovereign. You are no longer reacting. You are choosing. This is the revelation Kierkegaard would demand. That love without freedom is not love but performance, and intimacy without individuality is captivity. To be chosen means nothing if you abandon yourself in the process. To remain whole while offering your heart, that is the only path to connection that does not consume you. Because the ultimate betrayal is not hers, it is yours. The quiet surrender of the self in exchange for being seen. To awaken is to choose differently, to love without chains, to remain untouchable where control once ruled. That is the point where love ceases to enslave and begins to liberate both.